Welcome to the Live Electric Now podcast. This is episode 3 of a 4-part series on everything electric vehicles. I'm your host, James Campbell. I'm the Director of Innovation and Sustainability Policy at Rocky Mountain Power. And we're coming live from this fantastic location here at the Give Group. Thank you for hosting us. Chris, how you doing? We got Chris behind the glass. How you doing, Chris?
I'm doing great this week. A lot better than last week.
Yeah, and I have to tell you that music gets me in the mood every single time. So I'm just really excited to be here. And today's episode is really another one of my kind of fascinating, I think, really interesting topics is on urban mobility and urban issues. And so we talked, episode 1, we talked about the state of electric vehicles, where we talked about batteries and consumer preferences and how do we deal with infrastructure. Episode 2, we talked about the nexus between buildings and transportation and really had 2 phenomenal individuals of Chris Parker, who's the host here, and then Hanko Kishner with his company at Pack Size, and really had a fantastic conversation. And those are going to be available online, so please go and check out those podcasts. But today's episode, again, is going to be on urban mobility, and we have another all-star cast. We have really some incredible folks today. We have with us Hal Johnson with the Utah Transit Authority, who's a senior, he's the manager of project development, and he is probably the singular most expert that I know in electric buses, and he's a phenomenal individual. So welcome, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Great to be here with you today.
Our other guest is Michael Shea. He is besides being an incredible dancer, but anyway, Michael Shea is the environmental service manager at the Salt Lake County. He also has spent 10 years in kind of Utah politics, my nemesis and rival for many of those, and now my ally and friend. So, Michael, welcome.
Yes, yeah. Frenemies, I think is the next one.
Yeah. So, Hal, tell us about your career. I mean, I remember seeing a picture of you where you had that Wayne's World hair, and it looked like you were in a band. And how did you get to now teaching an urban planning class at the University of Utah and being one of the leaders in project development at UTA? So tell us about yourself.
So I've been with UTA for 25 years, and UTA was actually my first job out of graduate school, and it's been a great place to work. I've been able to I've had a lot of different jobs at UTA, and right now I'm manager of project development, which focus on kind of building new projects and services for the agency. And I'm also an adjunct professor at the University of Utah. I've been teaching up there for about 20 years and teach community planning in the School of College of Architecture and Planning. So.
Oh, exciting. Well, this is great. Thanks again for joining. Michael, so tell us what it's like where you were in the trenches being an environmental advocate. You were with HEAL for many years, and you were able to work as an idealist. You were able to really have a kind of that purity and of purpose, and to really go out there. And now you're in government. Now you have to deal with reality and deal with. So what has that change been like?
Yeah, no, it's certainly been interesting. At HEAL, it was very much, you could just instantly sort of make decisions. It was a very small team. We could decide, we want to support this legislation or oppose this legislation, and then immediately start, talking to legislators. Very fast moving, very reactive. And then in government, which is, of course, this is done on purpose, is it's a much more slow-moving machine. And you have a lot more resources, you have a wider range of expertise you can call on, but you have to work, within the system.
And you have more constituencies now to deal with.
You have a lot more constituencies. So that's an adjustment. But I think one of the parts I really enjoy is project development, and getting to work with people like yourself and Hal on different projects, and really seeing those come to fruition. So there's like everything, the grass can always be greener on the other side, and so. But it's a great position. It's a brand new position. Salt Lake County's never had a sustainability person before, and so getting to kind of evaluate all the different systems, it's cool. It's cool stuff.
Yeah. Well, again, thank you for joining.
For sure.
And today's topic, we're going to talk about urban mobility and really urban issues. And this last year in February, I actually attended the United Nations World Urban Forum. Woof. But which was really fascinating. And what happens in Abu Dhabi stays in Abu Dhabi, right, Chris?
That's right.
And but anyway, it was held in Abu Dhabi. It was a fantastic event and conference attending, and I was blown away at how much of a focus, really globally, on issues of urban development and urbanization that's happening. And some of the things I was learning, which I thought was fascinating, was we're experiencing the largest amount of urbanization in human history is happening right now, and especially in the last decade. And that where we think about here in the United States, right, we had urbanization was really around the turn of the century and the industrialization, and so you had the move from the farm into the cities. But today, now, 55% of the world is actually is urbanized, of global population. What was also interesting, North America, or what they called the United States, is called Northern America, which I don't know if that just meant Canada and the U.S. But North America actually had the highest level of urbanization in the world at 82%, compared to Europe of 73%. And it's really what they were talking about is there's a difference between urbanization and density, right? So like Europe is more dense, where now here in the United States we're more urban. We sprawl out, we kind of build out. So and so when we think of suburbs, that's, at least to the United Nations, that's urban. It's part of that, that continuous development that kind of goes out, and this sprawl that's continuing to happen. And here in Utah, what we're experiencing, we're anticipating this doubling of our population in the next, coming years. And we're going to have to start dealing with this expansion of urbanization and just this expansion of population and how we're going to address that. So Michael, how do you see the county preparing and planning for some of this urbanization, just increase of population we're going to be stuck with? Yeah,
no, it's an interesting and very, very difficult question, because in the past it's just been sort of do what you like and build where you want and build how you want, and that worked when the valley was half empty and we had all these farm fields that we could fill up with suburban neighborhoods, and you didn't really need to plan for that, and everybody could kind of just develop at their own way and their own pace. Unfortunately, what we're seeing is that has come with consequences, and that's traffic and pollution and suburban sprawl. And it's really unsustainable. You can't keep building at that level and in that direction without having without compounding the problem of what I just mentioned. And so we here at the county because we are the county is different than your standard municipal form of government. We don't have direct regulatory control over a certain area. We really view ourselves as a service provider of, whether it be animal services or police or fire or aging services. But one of our big jobs is regional planning. And so right now we're actually embarking on a West Bench regional plan, because that's the last undeveloped area of Salt Lake County. And so we're really trying to take a smart approach to that growth and being able to manage it in a way that we can mitigate some of the worst effects of suburban sprawl. And so that includes, transportation planning, making sure there's adequate public transportation available to new developments, but also, sustainable planning within the developments themselves, and making sure that, new developments have electric vehicle hookups, or some, other types of sustainable measures. And so it really takes a really intelligent, collaborative planning approach to help mitigate, what could become really bad.
Yeah, and so as you're talking about that transportation planning, especially as we see currently today with criterion pollutants in our air quality, our poor air quality, transportation vehicles are the number one source. There's been a lot of hoopla that we're transitioning to tier 3 fuels, which should improve, which is great, should have a short-term improvement in there. However, as our population grows, all of that benefit we got from moving to tier 3 fuels is going to evaporate because it's going to be replaced just with the amount of vehicles now just taking over. And so we'll be back to where we were at. And so, and not to mention that tier 3 fuels doesn't do anything for carbon emissions.
I was going to ask, can we say the words climate change on this? Is this
Yeah, we
safe
can.
Place?
This is a safe place to talk about climate change. So and that's the other challenge is it doesn't really address the climate change. So really, locally, we still have to address transportation, and transit is clearly one of those big kind of tools in that toolbox. So how, why don't you talk about how UTA's planning process, how you're seeing this from a transit perspective of how with our population growing, where you guys are working on and looking at?
So I guess that's a good question, and I guess we rely on our partners in a lot of ways to kind of help plan. So Wasatch Front Regional Council, they're our metropolitan planning organization, and they develop our regional transportation plan, and the plan focuses on highway, transit, as well as bike and pedestrian investments. And so that's really our blueprint for the future, if you will, that provides kind of the overarching vision of where we're going with the transit system. So we've identified in the regional plan, there's some expansions of the regional transit network, as well as more bus service and the development of what we're calling core routes, which are corridors where we would provide very frequent bus service over a long duration, so many hours, so probably 16 hours a day or more of very frequent bus service. So we've identified a lot of that in the long range plan. And so I guess kind of where I think things really come together, where transit and land use really mix, is where we've seen a lot of magic happen with respect to kind of shifting people from automobiles to walking and biking and transit. And so we have a couple really nice corridors where we've seen that coming together of transportation and land use. And so like along the 400 South line up to the University of Utah, that corridor we've seen with investments in the university side, as well as private sector investments along 400 South, close to $2 billion in new investment along that corridor. And it's really becoming an urban corridor where people are using the transit, but they're also biking and walking for a lot of their trips. And the S-Line corridor is kind of seeing a similar revolution, where there's a lot of density going in along those corridors.
It's interesting that you talk about these corridors, because I've noticed that there's a cultural dynamic locally where there are some folks who don't want to admit that we are actually urban.
Yeah.
Here, that's all like city's an urban place, yeah. And they kind of have this lens of this suburban, and that's it. And they kind of view those types of high volume or high density transit is, well, that's not part of our cultural identity.
Well, and if for people listening in, Salt Lake County had a very big controversy where, again, getting to that West Bench planning is we planned this development called Olympia Hills, and that was all about public transportation, increasing density, trying to decrease sprawl and suburbia. And man, we got so much pushback. And I mean, those are kind of the challenges that you're trying to work with. Is it's not just about the technology. It's not just about good planning. It's also there needs to be a cultural shift And that's, probably the hardest thing of all.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that is actually generational.
Yeah.
So I know a lot of younger people, like my son who lives downtown, and his car is still parked on my driveway. He needs to get it fixed. So Andrew, if you're listening, please go fix this up. But he's able to get around. He uses mass transit. He uses the buses. He bikes everywhere. He lives downtown. He's a student at the university, and so that's the lifestyle that he prefers. The only time he wants a car is to go to the desert or to go camping, and that's what Dad's
for. Yeah.
Well, and I was going to make the point. I think if you look at, people need different types of housing in different parts of their life, and so I think that's what's been really great about that 400 South corridor is it's really filled a needed market for people that were looking for urban and more downtown housing, where they're young people that want to live in a more vibrant environment. And so, I think looking at, it's important to have, even if you don't want to live on 400 South or in the Sugar House corridor, it's important to have for a healthy housing market, to have a lot of different kinds of housing that people could purchase.
Yeah, well, the building we're at here at the Give Group, at Project Open, we have the front runner train as it's driving by, I can see it going by there. You have the front runner train, the commuter rail, and then you also have the light rail right there, so it's walking distance, and you have a bus terminal or a bus hub right here as well. So you actually can live here, and what's great about this building is, as we talked about some of our other episodes, but this is a 100% all electric building that's being served by 100% renewable energy from our subscriber solar program. And so you can actually live here and be zero emissions, and then if you can get on the light rail, you're still being zero emissions. Unfortunately, though, if you get onto the bus or the front runner, you're not. So, and that's one of those interesting things I can imagine from the transit is with buses of, especially if we look at a lot of the improvements in air quality and emissions from vehicles, that there's been standards that are established primarily for passenger vehicles. And those standards have gotten really good, and especially Tier 3 fuels. That's why the criterion pollutants coming out of most passenger vehicles have gotten pretty good in terms of criterion pollutants. However, trucking, larger class vehicles like buses, delivery trucks, those others are on a different kind of standard in terms of what those emission standards are. And so one of the things that's interesting, which I really appreciate, what UTA has done, one of the kind of early transit authorities, is you've kind of delved into the electric buses. So tell us about your electric bus program that you got going.
So we have at UTA, we've got about, between our 40-foot buses and our paratransit vehicles, we've got about 600 buses in the fleet. And the long-term vision we have for the fleet is for a third to be diesel, a third to be electric, and a third to be CNG. And we've moved out maybe 10 years ago with a big CNG initiative, and that's been a really successful program for us to diversify the fleet mix. And we've been working over the last 5 years to move into the electric bus space. So we won a grant in 2018 to get 5 battery electric buses, 3 which UTA would operate, 2 which the University of Utah operates. And so we've had those buses in service for about a year and a half or so. And originally when we got the buses, they had some teething problems, if you will, where they couldn't climb the hills here in Salt Lake. The motor just wasn't big enough in the vehicle, and so we worked with the manufacturer to make changes on the vehicles and improvements before we took delivery of them. And that really worked in our favor, and we have really very good vehicles now. They're able to, the manufacturer, we haven't tested it, but they'll say it'll climb over an 18% grade with, full of people on it. And we did test it with 5,000 pounds of salt and a bunch of big mechanics on it, and we could climb any hill in Salt Lake. So
no, that's great. As one of your I don't know, I don't know how you refer to them as colleagues, right? Park City, which is right. You guys don't operate it, but they're separate. But obviously, it's collaborative. I think among transit agencies all stick together.
Yeah.
And but what was interesting is they were able to put it out first. I mean, they were able to put an electric bus route in. I think you think Park City is high elevation, but actually the route, it wasn't steep. It was a pretty flat route going from Kimball Junction into Main Street, Old Town, and a pretty flat, straight shot, about 8 miles or so, and just kind of run back and forth. And that bus route, and they just did an in-route charging. They were able to get one of the early buses from one of the manufacturers who they contracted with. It came out. I think it helped that they had some connections, but they were able to get it early, and they did that route. It was quite a successful, and I believe it's one of the most traveled bus routes in the country, electric bus routes.
Yeah.
They then expanded that, so they had about 6 buses in there that goes from Kimball Junction to Main Street, just back and forth, in route charging. So they put a charger on one end at Kimball Junction. Bus comes in on top, it charges, and then goes to Main Street, charges there, just kind of comes back and forth. So they're able to use smaller batteries and just do this bus route back and forth. Then they expanded, and that was very successful. Then they expanded it and did some depot charging on different routes, not using those overhead chargers, but actually now going back into the garage overnight, plug it in, and let it charge overnight, and then hopefully the battery would last throughout the day and throughout the routes. That aspect hasn't been as successful, but tell us about what you've been doing and some of your thinking in Salt Lake and the larger. It's one thing for Park City to test out in a small community, a simple route where you have a much more dynamic, bigger population, multiple routes, and how to manage that. But tell us your thinking on what you've kind of learned in your approach to this, to depot or to on route charge. This.
That's a great question. We were very fortunate in the timing of when we acquired our buses. So initially, when we were working with the manufacturer to fix the motor problem I mentioned earlier, they only offered a 200 kilowatt battery pack. But in the time we were working on that problem, they were able to offer a 400 kilowatt battery pack for the buses. And so that's been, and we went with it. We paid an extra $70,000 or so to go with the bigger battery pack. And the benefit of that was we can go about 125 miles without charging the vehicles. So, and an average bus route will run about 125 miles a day.
Okay.
And so we can almost run all day without charging, but our philosophy has been to build more redundancy into the system. So we went with bigger battery pack. We went with high-powered overhead charging. So we have the best of both worlds. So we can charge our buses at the transit center, and usually we put the chargers in the place where the buses would have the most time to be able to charge. So we drop customers off, and the bus can charge. And we're able to, in 10 minutes of charge time, we can pick over an hour's worth of driving time through the high-powered overhead charger. So our model is really more to be more diverse. So we've got a lot more redundancy with the big batteries, the overhead charging, and then so if we had a problem where our depot chargers went down, we could sustain the buses just on the overhead chargers, or if our overhead charger's not working, then we can sustain the buses just on the batteries. And one of the things that's really interesting about electric buses that are quite different than diesel is the weather makes a big difference for the miles per gallon equivalent of the vehicles. So if it's really hot, we have to use a lot of AC. That reduces our drive, the amount of miles we can drive. And the heating is the most, uses the most battery. So if we provide electric heat, it cuts the miles by about a third. So it's a great technology, and I think it's really evolving right now.
Yeah, no, that's that's great. It sounds like you're doing this kind of Goldilocks approach, a little bit of on-route charging and a little bit of depot, and have that combination. But as we're talking about some of how buses and these higher class vehicles pollute more, and which is really great now about these electric buses being able to come in as zero emitting. One of the things that's interesting though is still on these the routes and the roads where these buses go and where all the other vehicles go. A lot of the pollution is along roads and highways. And so, Michael, you guys are embarking on a pretty interesting project where you want to go and monitor some of those emissions and those pollutants associated with those routes. So tell us about the project you're doing.
Yeah, no, so and this is working with Hal, and we've got kind of a great team. But the idea is that obviously Salt Lake Valley, the Wasatch Front in general, has an air quality problem, in part because of our geography. We're in this bowl, and so for those that don't live in Utah, what happens if we don't have a weather system for a while? All the pollution from vehicles and buildings and construction equipment, it just ends up kind of sitting in the valley for days or weeks, and the longer it takes for a storm system to come in, the worse the air gets. And of course, it's not just man-made pollution. Wildfires and other natural causes have an effect, but it is a pretty bad problem, to the point where we sometimes have the worst air quality in the nation, despite being sort of a mid-sized urban community. And so to understand that, the Utah Division of Air Quality sets up air quality monitors, which are these sensors that sense particulate matter and ozone and NOx and VOCs and kind of all these different pollutants that have potential health consequences. And they're all in fixed positions, and so they can only monitor air that runs through them. And so it's kind of like trying to visualize a problem through a big haze. And so you can only get a general idea of, our air is really bad, but it's bad over this large of area, and you can't really get detail. And so with UTA adopting electric buses, we came up with the idea, because they don't have any emissions to mess up the sensor readings, that said, well, why don't we put air monitors on these buses? And the beauty of that is, not only can you are they mobile, and so you can get a sense of the pollution in this area is okay, but then the pollution in this area is really bad. But you can alternate routes, and so you can actually fine tune your data gathering. And the idea is that you'll be able to have much more prescriptive policy approaches to dealing with air pollution, rather than having kind of a blanket approach where the DEQ has anybody along the Wasatch Front can exchange a gas-powered lawnmower or something, but or Rocky Mountain Power has energy efficiency programs that you can take advantage of to swap out older water heaters or older furnaces. That's Dominion, but same,
Well,
utilities.
we actually are doing a heat pump program.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Oh.
for water heaters.
Well, there we go. Now you know. But what this would allow is if we can get a fairly good data map of pollution sources within the valley, then you could actually have geographical incentive programs to target specific areas.
Yeah,
and so
yeah.
you would spend less money getting more pollution reductions.
And especially since these roads and these highways tend to be built in underrepresented neighborhoods.
Mm-hmm.
And so now there's a social equity issue involved in that as well.
Yeah. No, it's still in its early stages. We're still trying to get funding. So if you're listening and you have a few tens of thousands of dollars laying around, we're looking for funding. But
Tiffany will write you a check.
Oh, excellent. But no, I knock on wood.
Well, no, but Rocky Mountain Power's gonna.
Yep.
Yeah,
Thank you, and
sponsor
same
that.
with UTA and Salt Lake County, and hopefully the legislature. Fingers crossed. But yeah, no, we think we're pitching it as a pilot project to take advantage of this new technology, and as UTA adopts more electric buses, the idea is if the concept proves sound, then we could, essentially just put an air monitor on every e-bus.
Yeah.
And so you'd get that detailed map.
Yeah, that's great. So Hal, you guys are you have a pretty big RFP right now going out. So it's so you had 5 buses that were operational. You got another couple of buses on top of that, but now you guys you're going big. So tell us about what you're doing right now.
So we're purchasing, coming back to that third bus strategy, the next steps on that for us beyond what we've gotten with the two first grants we got for the battery electric buses is we won a second grant through the Volkswagen settlement for another 20 battery electric buses and charging infrastructure. So we're moving forward with that. And then we're also planning for our Ogden Bus Rapid Transit project, which is pretty much like our UVX project in Utah County. We're planning for that to be battery electric. So that'll have another 11 battery electric buses. And then we've got within our RFP that's out, we're planning for additional options for up to 100 buses within that procurement. So some of the buses are committed to go to Park City, and then we have other options as well for UTA to continue to add more battery electric buses. And one of the key elements to be able to do this is we're working on a new bus garage in downtown Salt Lake, our depot district garage. So as soon as we can get the depot district finished, then we'll have a place to house all these buses that are on the way.
So talk about some of the economics of the electric buses and how that kind of works.
Yeah, I did want to make sure we touched on that. And it's always interesting when you tell people that a standard diesel bus gets between about 4 to 5 miles a gallon, and that's pretty normal, and that's pretty much across the industry, that 4 to 5 miles a gallon. And the CNGs they're a little bit more efficient, so they're getting the equivalent of about 6 miles a gallon. But we see a big jump with the battery electric buses. So typically our battery electric buses are getting between 15 and 20 miles a gallon equivalent.
Oh, wow.
So that's where there's some real benefits to heavy duty vehicles going with this battery technology, because we can see some significant energy savings and fuel savings with moving towards more of a mixed fleet with battery electric buses.
Has your mechanics, so talking to the folks up at Park City, it was interesting where there was a hesitation with the mechanics and working on these internal combustion diesel buses. It's what they know how to work on. They do it, and there was a hesitation, and then all of a sudden they got this new bus, this electric bus. And so what they were saying is it used to take about 2 days to work on a bus, just to do some maintenance work, because you got to get the bus in, you have to get underneath, so you got to lift it up to then get the engine out to then work on it. And then the joke is it takes about 2 hours to work on an electric bus with a coffee break in there versus 2 days. It's like just a shift in the mechanics. How are your mechanics?
It's been probably more seamless for UTA, because we have 50 miles of light rail that we operate and maintain, and that's all electric. And then our front runner locomotives are diesel electric, so they're a diesel generator driving an electric powertrain. And we also had a pretty big fleet of hybrid buses as well.
Yeah.
So our folks had a lot of experience with vehicle electrification, so that actually wasn't the big jump. It's been mostly on learning more on the charging infrastructure side. So kind of getting that piece of the equation put together.
Yeah. So I have to say that I appreciate that when UTA did a third model, that at the time that was a good model, but I'm going to push you a little bit. I don't think it's the right model now. Like where we're at today, we've kind of crossed a new threshold, and especially if the economics are good, we got to get you to start thinking a little bit bigger beyond this third. And I appreciate the challenge of any large organization and bureaucracy of once you have a plan, how to navigate beyond that plan. But I do want to challenge you, Hal, to start thinking beyond the third, and especially because we're gonna get, well, if you believe we're going to get the Olympics, which I do think Salt Lake City is a front runner. And pardon the pun there, but is a prime candidate for one of the next Winter Olympics. The challenge is what year? It's kind of funny. It's kind of fallen off with all the COVID stuff. You forget that that's still moving forward. That's like happening. There's an Olympic committee.
Yeah.
They're out there meeting. In the Salt Lake Olympic proposal, it calls for 100% a zero emission transportation system. And I just have this vision of what's going to happen is, right, we're going to get the Olympics within 3 years before the Olympics. How you're going to get a call from the governor's office and UDOT, and they're like, you guys got to get rid of all these things and you got to move over. And so, I don't know, what is your from the view of the county, Mike? What do you guys think of the long-term planning of where we need to go in terms of this transportation mix?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's always an interesting question, and it's a balance, especially in government, of pushing a little bit harder than where the market is, in that you can't, due to environmental concerns or policy concerns or whatever, you can't always wait for that price point to get there before you kind of adopt the technology, and so it's creating that balance of the right level of incentives and regulation and pushing and planning processes to make that happen. And yeah, I mean, I think from the county's perspective, we would like to see an electric public transportation system, especially you think it's not just about emissionless vehicles, but you think about where driverless technology is heading. And that is all shifting, electric. Nobody's really talking about, your driverless diesel, engine. And so it's anticipating the future and planning and investing, and so when that, price point tips, we will be prepared. And like you said, we won't be scrambling, 3 years before the Olympics to build, infrastructure for 1 million people. And so, yeah, I mean, it's all about, looking at the levers you have. And Salt Lake County is, again, a very unique organization and really uniquely situated to help UTA, a little bit more than, just what's within your standard budget, what's your standard operating budget.
Yeah, so why don't you talk about some of the neat programs you guys got going on? You Michael had mentioned some autonomy is right. If you think of transportation, we have these. The future of transportation is connected, autonomous, and electric as well, and so and shared. So why don't you talk about some of the neat programs that although I was giving you a hard time, I know you're one of the good guys in terms of looking forward, and I want you to guys go faster, but I do appreciate the work you're doing on that front. But why don't you talk about some of the innovative technologies that you guys and some of those programs and projects you have going?
So, excuse me, we've got a couple of pilot projects that we've done that are kind of in the space, and I want to make sure in the conversation we come around and talk about FrontRunner as well today.
Sure, yeah.
So we've got kind of two pilot projects that we've done. We've got what we call microtransit, which is it's a Uber Lyft-like experience, but done with transit vehicles. And so it's trying to take the best of all worlds. So transit is one of the big advantages is it's pretty low cost on the fare side, and so we have a partnership with a private company, Via Mobility, and we've done a pilot in Southwest Salt Lake County to provide Uber, Lyft like shared ride services with a phone app where you're able to connect to it. And the purpose of that for UTA is really to provide this first last mile connection to the transit system, be able to get people to the FrontRunner system, to the light rail system, and make those connections that I otherwise couldn't on transit.
So if I was down in, you said Southwest County, I was living down there, I could get on the app, and it's a UTA app.
Yeah.
I could get onto the transit app and say, okay, pick me up in And would it only take me to a specific location, or is it anywhere I wanted to go?
We call it corner to corner. So it's so we would take you to the transit stop. We would take you to key destinations. We don't necessarily
Within the transit system.
within the transit system.
So kind of this funnel, kind of hub and spoke type
Yeah.
of thing, like bring you back into a front runner commuter rail,
Yeah.
or a light rail or a bus route to address that first and last mile. So that way, from your home, you don't have to drive
Yeah.
to the front runner station and park your car and leave it there. You could just get the app and take you to pick you up.
And when you
and-
can't get an electric scooter.
Yeah. and if you, so for example, if you lived in a cul-de-sac, we may ask you to walk to the corner. So we didn't have
That's
to bring
too.
the
I'm
vehicle.
sorry, Hal. That's way too much.
And that service has done really well. So pre-COVID, we
Yeah.
were hoping to get up to about 400 trips a day on it, and we actually exceeded that. We got up to about 500 trips a
Oh
day.
wow! So how much how much does it cost? Is it like a market rate, like with Uber or Lyft, or is
No,
it,
it's just a transit fare.
Oh, so if I had a bus pass, would it be free?
Yeah, you just use it with the bus.
Wow.
So, and that's really done well for us. And like I say, we see it to kind of fill in the voids that the regional system can't do.
Yeah, yeah.
And the second project that we've done is partnering with UDOT. We did an autonomous shuttle demonstration. So it's a driverless vehicle, 12 to 15 passenger, small shuttle, walk in, walk out. And that was really kind of demonstrating the technology of being autonomous. It's electric vehicle. And we've ran that for like 9 months in a bunch of different
Was it a
locations.
class
Stop it
4 or class 5?
I think it's class 4. I'm not.
So you still have a driver in
no,
there?
class 5, no driver.
Okay.
Yeah, no
Wow.
driver.
This is up at the Capitol, right?
Yeah, we had it up at the Capitol. We had it at the University of Utah. We ran it
Yeah.
at Farmington Station. So, and the big things, you have to go in, you have to map the route ahead of time with LiDAR.
Yeah.
And then once the vehicle has that in, then it can operate based on the map.
So it's kind of like just a fixed route that's going almost like a trolley, like in San Francisco or something. You know, it's
Yeah.
just this kind of fixed route, and it would just go and stop at certain locations, and then
Get on and get off.
get on and get off. So kind of like a airport train sort of thing. Where
Yeah.
I always wondered, is there a driver in those airport trains?
Nope, no drivers in
Yeah.
there. So,
One of the
and-
great mysteries.
Yeah, because I never saw a driver, and yeah.
And we really see the application for these technologies is really to extend the reach of our regional system. We have one of the best rail systems in the country for a city our size. We've got a 90-mile front runner system and 50 miles of light rail that we run in Salt Lake County. So we have a great regional system, and what we just want to be able to economically extend the reach of that system.
Yeah, yeah.
And so that's really kind of the purpose of these projects.
So going back to the micro transit, I know that we've had some initial conversations about transitioning those vehicles to electric. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, we got options through. Went out to bid for our microtransit provider, and so they actually they provided us options to go with electric vehicles under the procurement. And so part of what we need to do to kind of take advantage of that is really figure out the charging infrastructure, because the vehicles will need to charge probably a couple times during the day to be able to run the miles that we'll need them to run. And so I think that's one of the things we're partnering with Rocky Mountain Power on, is really to figure out where we can do some of this charging infrastructure.
Yeah, and that actually leads to an interesting interesting point with the county, with some of your guys' goals, and especially on the EV front and expanding EV infrastructure at county facilities. And because one of the biggest challenges that is we really don't have as a community a whole lot of charging on the west side at all. And especially now, if that's where we see a lot of this opportunities for microtransit to come in, do you see, Michael, as an opportunity there to maybe partner with UTA and about finding locations where we can put in transit or put in infrastructures that could support some of these microtransit, whether it's for a UTA microtransit or just the other transportation network companies or TNCs. What is the county? What is your view of the role of TNCs and what the county can do?
Yeah, no, it's and it's kind of a difficult question to answer because you're in conversation, you and I have had conversations about this where the vast majority of electric vehicle owners will most likely charge their vehicles at home. And so, do we want to use taxpayer dollars to, put in a whole bunch of charging stations potentially that nobody's going to use, especially if we want to recoup some of that cost by charging people. But like you mentioned, unlike the east side, the west side is vastly underserved in terms of electric vehicle charging infrastructure. And so, we're trying to, working with Rocky Mountain Power and UTA is we're trying to figure out, what, public facilities that the county has, whether it be, parks or community centers or libraries, these gathering places that would allow, that we could put in charging infrastructure that would actually be utilized. And it really gets into this kind of chicken or the egg argument, right? Are people going to purchase electric cars and then the charging infrastructure will follow, or do we need to, place sort of wide-ranging charging infrastructure and then in the anticipation for wide-scale adoption?
Yeah, so when we're looking at right now developing our new $50 million EV infrastructure program, there's really these kind of two big components to it. There's the across the state, so address range anxiety. Can I get to Moab? Can I go to camp? Can I get to anywhere I want to go? And will there be charging infrastructure available? So, because most people make decisions on something that they'll do maybe 2% of the time.
Right, yeah.
For that one trip a year that they go down there, but they want to have that ability to go anytime
right,
they want.
Of course.
And but so that's one aspect. But another one is on the urban side. And so my thinking has always been, because of most commuters are going to drive, or they're going to charge at home or at work, because that's the cheapest way to do it. Because you can put in a cheap level 2 small charger. Just the car's going to sit. Cars sit 95% of the time. They sit either in your garage or in the parking lot at work.
Mm-hmm.
You only are driving at 5%. So put in the infrastructure where they're sitting all the time. So the one exception of that is the fleets, whether that's bus fleets, that's the microtransit fleets, or the TNC fleets, where there they will need that infrastructure to support that, because there they have this high volume. So there we got to figure out where to put that infrastructure, support that. And then the other aspect of who needs other infrastructure are underrepresented communities as well. If you're living in an apartment, the apartment complex may not have it, so you need some of this public charging as a need. And I'm really excited with kind of some of the approach that we're seeing. Is there a way, when we put some of this charging infrastructure, can we co-locate, utilize some of the infrastructure? And we're doing a project with UTA to look at that, because where UTA is putting in these electric buses, we're looking to can we co-locate and put in ultra fast charging right next to these electric buses, so we can actually share some of that infrastructure and hopefully reduce the costs down that. How do you want to comment at all on that?
Yeah, I think that we're really excited about the work that we're doing with you and Utah State to look at how to maximize the charging infrastructure, minimize the impacts on the grid, because CalSTART, they're a third-party nonprofit that does technology development. They've got a nice graphic that shows when we plug in our 2 electric buses, it's like plugging in 400 or 500 homes all at the same time. So it's a big load coming in and off of the grid all at the same time. So if there's ways where we can maximize the number of people who are using it, it minimizes the overall need to increase grid infrastructure. So we're really excited about the work that Utah State's doing to kind of look at this optimization question and really put some computer thinking and logic to this problem, and hopefully come out with a great solution for us.
Yeah, no, I'm really excited about that.
Well, and actually, that raises an interesting question while you were just talking. Like, from Rocky Mountain Power's perspective, I mean, let's say, we do go full electric buses, electric semis, electric, class 5 through 8 trucks. I mean, let's the environmentalists, dream of everything going electric. I mean, is there
And the electric utility dream as well.
Yeah, exactly. As long as they're from renewable sources. But I mean, would we have to completely, is there enough grid infrastructure to provide that much power?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. So one of the uniqueness, we actually did some studies with the University of Utah to look at residential. So I'll address that grid impacts, transformer impacts, and the modeling that the study showed that the existing infrastructure, which is already built out, can handle about 50% like adoption, which is pretty high adoption levels. Mm-hmm. In the Western United States, we're a little different than in terms of this merging of transportation compared to other regions. And one example, when I went to the United Kingdom last year, this time I was in the UK.
You could have gone on some great trips.
I know. It was, I was invited as part of a British delegation. Her Majesty's Foreign Service invited me to join with some other utilities and other folks, but to go and do kind of a information share. The United Kingdom's a little different. Their grid is already built out. So they're already basically at capacity. They do not have air conditioning. So it's northern climate. So now when they're looking to add vehicles into their homes, they're looking at a doubling of the load. So it's a big impact, and they're scrambling, like, how do we bring this whole new load in? Here in Utah and in the Western United States, we have air conditioning. So what we've done, the prime directive of a utility is keep the lights on. So you have to build to peak. So what we've done is we have a peak load in the summer around 6 p.m. because you're coming home, you're flipping on the AC, even though you're an environmentalist, you're like,
I've rooftop solar,
No, but when you come home, everybody turns it on, and so you get this peak about 6 o'clock, and so we have to build to make sure we have the capacity to that. But then off of that peak, whether that's in other times of the year, other times of the day, there's capacity there. So the big challenge is going to be, at least at the initial levels of adoption, is we just want to make sure we're not adding to the peak, but just shifting that load during periods where we have sufficient capacity and we can absorb it.
Yeah.
Now, if we start getting to levels of 30% adoption, and we're looking at big semis. So the semis they'll have to build infrastructure just for that.
Right.
But so we'll,
it's like megawatt hours.
Yeah. Well, and we're dealing this with UTA right now, kind of going through this process of how do we design this when we're looking at buses, and do you do the traditional way of design, which is this kind of worst case stacking of loads, and so we build to that peak worst case. But so we're trying to find creative solutions not to have to do that, to reduce really the cost impact initially, but eventually over time we'll have to expand to address it. But it will be, in the long run, it's still cheaper to do it that way. It's just it's an investment over a longer period of time, and to get off of fossil fuels, because electricity is cheaper than gasoline. I mean, that's just one of those. But did you wanted to say something about that what we're doing with what you're doing with looking at that?
I was just going to say, I think the one of the beauties about this concept is that we have really heavy peaks with the light rail that come in.
Yeah.
And so we have to size everything for this, 2 4-car trains pulling out of the station. And so we have pretty significant power and infrastructure associated with the light rail, but we only use it for, a few seconds at a time. We draw that maximum energy. And so if we can kind of use that infrastructure and make the most of it, it's really can be a win-win for UTA and Rocky Mountain Power.
Yeah, so I was getting sick of Hal complaining to me about them having to pay this demand charge for only using it for a few minutes. and then it goes away. And so that's when really came up with the idea of this intermodal hub concept, where it's like, okay, well, why don't we, in between the train going by, let's charge the buses.
Yeah.
So that way you have the same demand, and it's just, you flatten out.
Shave that peak,
Well, you don't shave it, you just increase your utilization. So instead of charging when the train goes by, so you add to the peak, you stop charging when the train goes by, and then you have it come back on. So that's where we're working with Utah State University to develop an artificial intelligence control system to do a power balance and a demand response. So that way, when the train goes by, you turn off the charger and you charge the buses. Well, when the bus is done charging, then you open it up maybe for delivery trucks, or then you open it up for maybe TNC, Uber and Lyfts, or you open it up for the microtransit. So you kind of fill in these valleys in between these spikes of loads that happen. So now you're having a flat charge or a flat load that's going by that's consistent and constant, but you're now able to spread those demand charges across multiple users. So you've actually reduced the cost for everybody.
Yeah, and I'd be curious, to look at some studies in that. Does it when we're talking about all this increased electricity use, this increased energy use, would most of it happen during the day? And I bring that up because one of the big problems with solar that you and I have had many debates about is of course the sun doesn't shine at night, and so you lose
It's more about you whining and
the evil utility, full-loving utility. No, but it's because the residential peak load is where all those discussions have, and is right when everybody comes home and turns on all their appliances. The sun sets. And so with commercial trucking or busing or all these potential electrifications, would that demand drastically increase during the day, where you could mitigate a lot of that with solar? I
think the commercial loads, like exactly for trucking and busing, that's a great use of this solar power, especially in the spring when we don't need it, where there's a surplus of generation, and it's just the value of that we have these phenomena of negative pricing in California,
you get paid to take
California will take
solar,
us,
right? And
then people have rooftop solar want us to pay them a premium when California, want us to, so it's just kind of a crazy.
It's a fair price. They
Yeah.
want you to pay a fair price.
It's an interesting dynamic. So I think with the commercial, there definitely is more of alignment with use, and I actually think as you talked about, when we start shifting over, we're going to get different peaks than the air-conditioned peak that we have right now. And especially if we start moving to heat pumps.
Yeah.
Because heat pumps on the air conditioning side actually lower the peak. And so they're actually way more efficient than traditional air conditioners. So it'll be interesting. I think as we kind of go out in the future, we'll see a shifting of loads. And if we start planning right, can we move those loads to align more with solar production, where right now it's not quite there?
Well, and I think that's where the battery electric buses could come into the equation, because with 125-mile range, we can skip 4 hours or more without charging, and then with our high power charging infrastructure, we can take on a lot of energy. So if there's times when we need to, we could plug the buses into the high powered chargers and pull.
And that's part of this vision of this artificial intelligence
AI stuff,
system, is that we can tell, like, hey, it's spring, we got negative pricing in California, so hey, you buses, fill up. Fill her up.
Like, take as much as you can.
So I did want to go back to one thing about the Olympics that I thought was an interesting question, and this is how for you. Can an electric bus go up Little Cottonwood Canyon?
100%. We've taken our battery without a doubt, and we could do it. We can do it with 6,000 pounds of salt and a bunch of mechanics on there.
Okay.
We can absolutely do that, because we've run our battery electric bus up to Park City multiple times, up Parley's Canyon, and it does that trip just fine.
Okay, so Michael, Cybertruck, love it or hate it?
I've already got mine on reserve.
Hal, love it or hate it?
I think it's a great concept. I'm glad to see that's the missing link. That's everybody here wants a truck to drive.
camping.
So excited to see that coming into the marketplace.
Yeah. So I think we're kind of about out of time. So Mike, I'll let you give an opportunity to give you a word to say. You have the
My
microphone.
soapbox.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
Careful,
yeah.
don't give me a soapbox.
So on urban mobility and in a 20-second summation, what would you what do you have to say?
I mean, I think the future is really full of potential and possibilities, and it really will take, we can either have all this growth and have incredible traffic jams and tons of pollution, and generally a not great standard of living, or by getting smart, forward-thinking organizations together with public input and policymakers, we can create a 21st century transportation system, and you can get anywhere in the valley in 10 minutes.
Great. Well, Hal, do you have any last word?
I just wanted to touch on Front Runner and just say
That's right.
That's one of the big areas where we're very interested in electrifying Front Runner in the future, and we use, just off the top of my head, about 3 million gallons of diesel a year on the Front Runner system. So if we can electrify through a combination of catenary or battery systems, that's really a big potential for kind of UTA moving towards more of a electrified.
That's where that next form of electrification to really kind of get us to what Mike was just talking about. Well, thank you both so much. This has been a fun conversation. And again, this is the Live Electric Now podcast. Thank you both for joining us. I'm your host, James Campbell, and we'll be coming live next week on October 2nd, where we have Dr. Regan Zane and a special guest coming. So look forward to that. And again, thank you so much to the ghosts. Tiffany, Chris, thank you for your hard work, and goodbye.
Thank you. Yes. Cheers. Hopefully it was good on the other end. It seemed good here.
Are we off?
We are
Now we're
off.